Oh, hi. Welcome back. Today we're really privileged to have with us Margaret Thomas, the former journalist who was a keen observer of elections between 1978 and 1998. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Hi, PJ.
So, you got into journalism late 1978, which is the beginning of a very turbulent period for Singapore. What was that like?
Oh, it was fun. We had a by-election in, was it early part of 1979, February, March or something like that. I was barely 2 months into the job as a journalist at the Business Times and not having covered any of this kind of stuff before. And so I went to one PAP rally in some HDB estate, I forget where it was, and decided to watch it from the vantage point of the second floor of a block that was overlooking this basketball court or some such place where they were having the rally. And then to my surprise, out from the PAP had a branch office not far away, and out walked this tall man, and it was Goh Chok Tong, who was the rising star in the PAP then. He was, I think, the organizing secretary at that point, in charge of the by-elections. And to my surprise, he came up and stood next to me, and I forget who started the conversation, but for 10 minutes he actually entertained a discussion with me, young reporter, with this young rising PAP star. And we had this quite intense conversation about the need for an opposition. And my argument, probably an unsophisticated argument then, was why opposition for opposition's sake. And what struck me and stayed with me for a long time was that he was ready to listen to me, acknowledge my points, counter them, of course, but he didn't just put me down, which the Prime Minister of the time, LKY, would certainly have just given me a dismissive stare and walked off. You know.
Did you find his arguments convincing?
Not particularly. But it gave me a good impression of him, which was to continue for some time.
I see. It's very interesting, this period, because of course there were going to be a lot of controversial issues that arose in the next few years, including the failure of the Second Industrial Revolution, the ending of Chinese and vernacular language because of Goh Keng Swee report, the slashing of subsidies to the HDB and allowing people to withdraw money from CPF to buy housing, and of course the graduate mother scheme. And I think all these things then led people to decide that we really need to have opposition in Parliament, leading to the election of J.B. Jeyaretnam in 81 and then Cham Si Tong in 84. And you saw all this close up. What was the feeling on the ground back then?
I unfortunately didn't see JB's election into Anson firsthand. I had left what was to become SPH. I left the Business Times to join the Singapore Monitor, which had a very brief stretch of history, time in our publishing history. And I think the Anson by-election was in the third quarter, towards the end of 1981. And we had just assembled in the Monitor, and we were going through dry runs and teaching, so I wasn't actually there. But a lot of my colleagues and former colleagues were there, and there was this incredible sense of exhilaration that someone had finally broken through that impossible barrier that the PAP had. And I think there were some journalists, in fact, who were later taken to task because they were seen to be jumping for joy.
Right.
But it wasn't actually jumping for joy. One of them was jumping so that you could get a better view of what was going on. But it was because you consider that there'd been no opposition in Parliament since, 68, I suppose, when the virus pulled out. And finally to have someone break through, it seemed to be an impossible task. So it was exhilarating, I think that's the word at that point. Then, of course, 3 years later, 1984, the other impossible barrier was broken. The Parliament, we had not had any women in Parliament since 1970, when Chan Choi Siong, who was an outstanding woman politician, retired very early to make way for new blood. I mean, she was, I think, barely in her 50s, and she had to make way for new blood, and that was unfortunate. And In fact, in going back a little bit, in 1980, Choctaw, there was a general election, and Choctaw was again organizing secretary. And I was going around with him, walkabouts and all these things. And at one of these stops in a hawker center, I and several other, I think were mainly women reporters, took him to task on this matter, that why are there no women candidates? From the PAP, I think the opposition parties had some. And he came up with this answer. Choctaw still has this habit of putting his foot in his mouth. He came up with this response, which he probably didn't really mean in the way he said it, was, find me a woman as good as a man.
Ooh.
Yeah, and he explained it a little bit further, but he got a lot of flack for that. And it wasn't until 1984 that they finally found 3 women candidates.
Right, I see. And was it by this time you had co-founded Aware?
Oh, no. It wasn't Choctaw's remarks that led to the formation of Aware. It was the Great Marriage Debate, the National Day Rally in 1983,
right,
in which Lee Kuan Yew made these rather preposterous remarks about women, because they were educated, were no longer getting married, and that if Singapore's bright graduates did not marry each other, that our talent pool would be depleted, in a very eugenicist remark.
Yes.
And then after that we saw the slew of policies that favored graduate mothers and tried to discourage less educated people from having children, and that was what led eventually to the formation of Aware.
I see. Now, in this period, of course, because of the election of Jeyaretnam and Chamsi Tong, we see all these new policies enacted by the PAP government from about 86 to 1991 or so, including the GRCs, the town councils, which would then directly tie provision of public services to your vote, the elected presidency, the changing of how they draw electoral boundaries from being passed, voted through Parliament, to being done by a committee responsible to the Prime Minister. Then, of course, they brought back the use of the Internal Security Act, and they enacted the law preventing the Law Society from commenting on legislation, the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, and of course nominated MPs and non-constituency MPs, which is actually nominated MPs were a colonial practice which the colonial government used to stack the deck in their favor in the colonial period. Was there a sense at this time, as you were living through this, that the government was actively trying to rig the system in their favor?
Yeah, well, it depends on how you look at it. When they came up with the NMP and NCMP scheme, it was couched in terms of, okay, we are listening to you. You clearly want more expression in Parliament, but look at the opposition parties. They are so pathetic that they can't get in on their own steam. So we cannot create make it easier for the opposition parties to get in. But what we can do is come up with this. Okay, the biggest losers can get a seat in Parliament. And MPs, increasingly, society is going to have different interest groups who need to vent, and MPs will allow this venting, expression of.
But was there any sense, for example, did people say, but that gives certain people 2 votes, right? Because if you're in a constituency of the biggest loser, you get a vote through your MP and the vote through your losing MP. Or if you are, say, a business person, you get a vote through your MP, and then a nominated MP who represents business also represents you. And so it does away with this, one man, one vote.
There were some other suggestions about doing away with the one man, one vote.
Yes,
at some
of course.
point. So,
yes.
The tinkering has been going on for some time, and presumably will go on. But then I suppose if you have run a place, whether it's a country or a company or even a publication, and it's been doing well, and you're convinced that your way is the right way, you presumably will want to continue to stay in power so that you go on doing the right thing. At which point should you, if you are able to, stop and start listening to those who are saying, hey, you're not doing it right,
Mhm.
or you're not doing it right enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I mean, I sympathize with them, not sympathize, I feel sorry sometimes for the PAP because it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. Right?
Yeah. I suppose from my point of view, I'd say, you know, if they would make the playing field fair for the opposition, and then the opposition don't perform, then the PAP can say, well, you know, it's not because we're rigging the system or gerrymandering, it's because the opposition suck. You know, but the fact that they rig the system means that the opposition, whether they succeed or fail, have a free pass to criticize because it's unfair for them. So
it's not just rigging the system, right? I mean, those are all the technical things they put in place, but it's this outright attack on anybody who's stood in opposition, not just in party politics. You know, I mean, Online Citizen is gazetted, right?
Yes,
And, you know, and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Voluntary organizations I'm involved in have to have in their constitutions that they must not get involved in politics,
Yes.
which led to that funny situation of the Home for the Aged when it was used as a venue for a PAP press conference.
Yes.
And, you know, so, I mean, there's good and bad, but you've got to apply it equally. The fact that people like Lau Tia Kiang have stayed in, or even Cham Si Tong earlier, stayed in and managed to succeed despite the very many attacks on them is remarkable. I remember being there at the PAP rally in Potong Pasir in, was it 1980, I think, when Hau Yun Chong and Dana Balan slandered him.
Yes.
And he was able, the one instance, I think, of an opposition party, a politician being able to sue the PAP and actually win damages, happened there.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time, so I just wanted to ask you quickly about Aware's recent statement that you know, there aren't enough women candidates. We have come a long way since 1970, but then in some ways we've gone backwards since 1959 when there were a lot of women who stood especially for the PAP, but also for the opposition and, you know, in 59. So how do you feel about the future of women's participation in politics?
Well, it's much better than it was in the 70s, when 70 to 1984, right? I think the PAP mindset, because they're the dominant party, you know, but Workers' Party is quite far behind PAP in terms of the percentage. The dominant tone is still set by the PAP, like it or not. Quite apart from the number of people fielded in elections, we've only got one woman minister.
Yes.
Right?
And we had none in the previous.
Exactly. There was one who lost the seat, and then, you know. And if you look at the number of women who in other parts of life are running organizations, very large organizations, there's no shortage of capable women.
Yes.
So it could be one of two things, or both things. Is the PAP looking hard enough? And why are women who might be good candidates not wanting to go into politics? And I think you need to look at this one.
Yes.
You know, the answers required in both areas. It's the mindset. If you look at listed corporations, Singapore has got one of the lowest numbers of women, percentage of women in corporate boards. I think it's like under 9%.
That's all?
Which is lower, these are listed corporations, lower than many other neighboring countries.
Yes.
You know, and
That's
there's this
shocking.
great, even Grace Fu, PAP women politicians have suggested that we should have a guideline of a 30%. Aim for that, you know.
Yeah.
But there's been this reluctance to do this sort of thing. So there's a lot of room to grow.
There is a lot of room to grow, but you know, I think we can say we're both optimistic about the future for Singapore.
I think we have to. You look at some of the women candidates that are on offer today.
Yes, very talented.
Very encouraging.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Good luck.
And thank you for your thoughts.
Okay.
We'll be right back.